So we have our first mailbag question. I won't say who this came from because I did not ask if I could say who this came from. I forgot. But it is tying back into the Acolyte. And let's go ahead and say, Nate put up the spoiler warning. Is the message of the Acolyte that the Jedi are villains? So that's my question for you, Zach.
I mean, greed happens when anything gets too big.
Ooh.
You know, power. So Mother Anastasia says it. It's not about good or evil. It's about who has power and is willing to use it, or like who has and the freedom to use it. That's what the show I think really is. But yeah, I mean the Jedi in this are portrayed not great. I mean, there's very colonizer vibes at the beginning. You know, they go into this planet. They're like, ooh, all these resources, all this thing, we have to study it. Oh, there's some people here. I guess we'll kill them on accident. You know, they're not good. I mean, Sol, while a fantastic character, not necessarily a good guy. He steals a child from or people, or like can manipulate her a little bit sometimes. Or he thinks he's doing the right thing. They always think they're doing the right thing. He thinks he's the paragon of good, but he ends up like he kills her mother. Now, granted, yes, she did turn into a crazy, scary thing, but like he's very reactive. Before that, his big fault is being like, oh, Torben, you want to go in there? Let's go. You know, like he could have been like, hey, we need to take a moment. We need to act rationally. We need to, you know, not barge into this coven of witches with two people and lightsabers, and you know, like that's really what his downfall is. It's not necessarily killing the mother, which is definitely wrong, but his big thing is not being like, hey Torben, we need to check ourselves real quick and take a moment. You know, because Indara tries to be peaceful the whole time. She approaches everything pretty correctly, and then Torben is like, no, we're gonna do it, and then he's like, yeah, let's go, brother. You know, so I don't think it necessarily villains all Jedi, but I think the point is that the Jedi are so big at this point, it's impossible for them all to be good. It's impossible for them all to be perfect. I mean, and no Jedi is perfect. I think that's part of the point of Star Wars as well. I mean, the takeaway from attachments and all that ultimately leads to the downfall. And when, you know, later on it's like, okay, cool, like people and love is good, you know, and we don't have to cut ourselves off from that. And so, I mean, that's what Anakin struggles with the most, is he's not has people. So yeah, I don't think it's villainizing Jedi as a whole. I think it's showing, hey, once everything is big, it's too big to be perfect, and as things get bigger, greed and power. I mean, Palpatine even says it in Episode 3. He goes, "The Jedi are all about power too, and they are afraid to lose it."
What does he say? The Sith. Anakin's like, the Sith only think about themselves, and Palpatine's like, and the Jedi don't.
Yeah.
Yes, all of that. I will say, just only to defend the late Master Sol a little bit, because this is spoilers. Osha wanted to go, and he saw that. But what is probably the most villainizing thing, I suppose, the show did, was that the Jedi have a policy that if there are Force-sensitive kids, they get to take them, period.
Oh yeah, get to interview them.
That's what, or they get to assess them and take them. And Indara says that. You know, we have a right to assess their abilities. Yeah. Because it's the whole thing, who has power and who gets to use it, right? That, like, if there's any Force sensitives, the Jedi are going to take them.
Yeah.
Which you can look as, it's our duty to shepherd them on the path that we think is right. It's our duty to keep them from becoming Sith. But then it's also like, hey, maybe you should let people do their own thing.
I bump up against that, because they've mentioned before that if, like, the Force is not cultivated in a being, then it doesn't necessarily take hold. You know, like their Force powers. You know, like
yes, but
it's not taught.
But Kymir also says that the Sith way doesn't take as much training.
Yeah.
Because if you have rage, if you have anger, anybody can throw a fit. anybody can have a temper tantrum. And if you have someone that is naturally sensitive to the Force and they are never taught how to deal with their negative emotions, they're a nuclear bomb waiting to go off, which would be the argument for the Jedi being like, hey, you know we have a right to evaluate these kids. And I'm not saying they're correct in that, but I'm saying that's the argument for why they do that. That's the most villainizing thing that I think that they do. But yeah, you're right.
They're the opposite of the Xavier School for Mutants, where it's like, hey, you blew up, it's okay, come, I'll teach you. It's like, no, I'm going to take, before you could blow up, I'm going to teach you.
It's the whole, it's at what point are we operating, as Yoda says, fear is the path to the dark side. And if you are operating preemptively, if you are trying to prevent something, you are fundamentally operating out of fear as opposed to faith. And that's kind of the whole thing. Torben is so itching, just ready to get off that planet, that he sees the first sign of something that could make this big enough.
Yeah.
He's like, let's go. Just like you said, let's go do it. Let's get him. And it's also that he's the young person wanting adventure, right? He's like, I don't want to be on this planet scanning plants. I want to do fun stuff. I want to take out my lightsaber. I want to do the Obi-Annie spin. So I don't think... this is what I will say about the Acolyte. Villainizing Jedi. The Acolyte is not the first time that the Jedi have been viewed through a more complicated spectrum. It's not the first time they've been portrayed in a slightly antagonistic role.
Yeah.
They were that way in the prequels.
Yeah.
And I think most, in my opinion, of the kind of people not getting the Acolyte are that they didn't necessarily see that in the prequels, which you could say is a fault of the films. You absolutely could. But it's there. The Jedi fail Anakin.
We're supposed to be peacekeepers.
Exactly. We are keepers of the peace, not soldiers. And then in the same movie, Mace Windu is leading the charge, which is the point. It's that the point they have lost their way. That is the point of the prequels. It's like people get mad that Disney Lucasfilm canon refers to the era of the prequels as the fall of the Jedi. They're like, why? What do you mean? It's the extinction of the Jedi. I was like, it's the fall of the Jedi. They chose to fight in a war, and Yoda sees that by the end of the prequels. He starts to see it at the end of Star Wars Episode 2, but it's not the first time the Jedi have been portrayed in a morally complicated fashion. This is maybe being a little more overt about it, but what I said last week, I think, was that for me, this show does not villainize people, it villainizes actions. Like, every one of the characters does something that you could say, that is, I don't know. But you can always see why they did it. With the exception of, like, Kelnaka. Our Wookiee boy gets bewitched and then comes out of it going, I'm going to go live in a forest by myself because I am too dangerous. Actually, yeah, now that I think about it, Kelnaka might be the most morally uncompromised character that there is on the show.
We don't know what he's saying. He could be cursing the whole time.
That's true. All right. Well, so hey, there's our first mailbag. There's our first hashtag Force of Others mailbag. If you know me and Zach, text us. Let us know anything you'd like us to talk about on the show.
If you don't know us, email us at forceofothersradio at forceofothersradio@gmail.com.
Yes, exactly. Send in your questions. We will answer them on the show.